that will be important and insightful with one of our members who is doing some exceptionally interesting work, and one of our partners who has helped us with a bunch of interesting work and actually has worked with many of our members, and so has some great insights around the work that organizations do with partners and how we approach some of these things and the challenges we run into and the opportunities that are in front of us. So let me welcome to the stage Ron from Compassion and Steve from Tableau. Come on up, gentlemen, and we're going to have a fireside chat like we've been sitting around and discussing these issues for eons. Thank you both for joining us this morning. And I'm going to ask you, I'm going to start this off somewhat informally, from the sense of saying, both of you come at some of the questions around how organizations address digital transformation from very different perspectives, right? One from the products and services and capabilities that get created for organizations to leverage, and another from the perspective of saying, we have a mission that we're trying to accomplish, and we want to use tools to do that. Look out, I don't know, maybe 12, 18 months down the road. From Compassion's perspective, where do you want to see? Where does your organization want to be in the broader sense of using technology to accomplish your mission? What's the big vision from a Compassion perspective?
Sure. So I think the things that we look at 18 months down the road are things like data science. We have data analytics today, a fairly good set of platforms there. Tableau is one of those. But data science is fairly nascent with us, and we need that in place as we develop a platform. In addition, I think a lot of field-facing technology. We've finally, I would say, almost caught up in terms of deploying technology, and are looking now to take that all the way out to the church so that there are devices right there with the child. So I think those are probably the two.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I'm really forward-looking. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I think we come into this conversation with a recognition of two very important facts. One is that this work is really hard, and we certainly don't know everything. We don't even know what we don't know yet, but working with great partners is a terrific way to build that kind of capacity and knowledge. The other is that because it's hard and because we don't have all the answers at the outset, we're going to learn along the way. So the way we approach partnerships and grant making, and the way we approach just our understanding of the space, it's really driven with an expectation that things are going to evolve, that we're going to learn from the data as the data starts coming in, and we're going to need to reposition. So, as we think 12 to 18 months out, I think it's more important for us to be thinking about in terms of who are we getting involved with, and what sort of partners do we have, what sort of expertise do they have, and then how can we put them in the best possible position to succeed.
That's great. Yeah. Ron, you guys, Compassion works through churches all around the world, supports children all around the world, and not to stereotype anything, but child sponsorship is an idea that has been around for a long time, but you're taking a very different approach to it. Mm-hmm. I know you guys have thought deeply about this. How do you think about child sponsorship moving forward, right? Like, what's the conversation inside Compassion? Don't give away anything you can't give away, but what's the thought inside Compassion about how you bring these modern tools to work that is fairly traditional in this space?
Sure, it's just us in this room and whoever's watching online.
Right,
so
it's just 2,000 of your closest friends.
Yeah, so when we look at child sponsorship, I think there's certainly a strength in that one-to-one relationship that we have, right? The sponsor to the child and back, again, writing letters and getting to know each other. And more importantly than even each other, the contexts in which each other live. I think it helps the sponsor understand a global setting a lot better, and the child then, their eyes come up a little bit and see what's possible. They may not have seen that before. But as we look at that, we know that model isn't as accretive for younger people in terms of sponsorship. So without labeling a generation, let's say that the younger folks that we're looking at would rather that we had a stake in the game as well. a buy one, get one kind of thing. And so we're looking at models like that. In addition, outside of just one-to-one sponsorship, which really is the strength of our model, we're looking at other products, let's say. It could be that rather than just the one-to-one relationship, maybe 300 people in a church here have one-to-one relationships with an entire program. And so the one church now sponsors an entire church and program. In addition to that, you could then layer on giving to the community, fresh water and wells and hygiene and whatever else. But models like that extend a little bit the one-to-one relationship.
It is interesting to think about the changing expectations from a generational perspective in that one-to-one relationship. How long, and this is just my own lack of knowledge, but how long does a typical donor support a typical child, a sponsor support a typical child, and have you seen that changing with generations as well?
We don't know yet, especially with the youngest piece of the generation. Right now, our average sponsorship length is something like 10 years, 8 months, which makes some sense. Our programs had historically been age 3 to 14 to 18, depending on which country, right, when they come out of primary school. Now the biggest, fastest growing piece of our program is the 0 to 3, so the mother-baby programs. About 11% of what we do now and growing pretty quickly. So that actually may go up. Again, that's that relationship that gets built. It is one-on-one, and you get to know that child, not just a child. So that tends to keep people around.
It is interesting that you don't know what you don't know yet, right? And as the programs change, who knows what will happen with that. Steve, you've been working with Tableau, and I mean, you guys work obviously with quite a bit of data. Looking back since Tableau started working with so many of our member organizations and nonprofits otherwise, can you characterize some of the trends you've seen in the things you didn't know 18 months ago or 3 years ago that maybe you know now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have both expected and learned an incredible amount about change management inside of an organization. I think one of the things that was really interesting is we went in there guns blazing talking about data, big data. Everybody got excited about data. And we very quickly had to change how we do that because data scared people. It was, if they had encountered it at all, it had often been very punitive. It was used in performance reviews, but it wasn't something that was feeding their day-to-day activities. We very quickly learned that when we go in and talk to an organization, we don't need to necessarily go in and talk about data-driven decision-making. We talk about information. What information do you need to do your job well today? And we're really focused on operational processes and just trying to line the technology up all the way through there, and have found organizations much more receptive in that way to not even so much suggestions, but making them feel like they're empowered and in control of the choice to start using data in doing their work well. And I think what we've learned is we've brought in a lot of ways, that has brought the best out of folks who may have had higher aspirations for what they wanted to achieve and just kind of felt a little bit handcuffed in terms of what they could do with the technology they had on hand at the time.
One of the questions discussion points that came up yesterday during some of the CEO meetings was this question about performance data, organizational performance data, and how do we address it? Do you see organizations being wary of that at the beginning and shifting, or are they super excited about it from day one and get even more excited about it over time?
It is a crapshoot on the organization and who you're talking to. I think there's a few variations in our experience. I think there are program teams that have been traditionally working with data in a form who get very excited about what they can do with real-time analytics and the ability to share information back down to the field almost instantly. There are others, when the conversation starts on the IT side, it's much more of a data governance question and concern. There's a lot of proprietary information, and when you have a lot of identifiable data, or being able to identify individuals in some incredibly difficult places to work, there are very real security concerns that we absolutely have to respect, especially when you start to get into questions of disaggregating data for the sake of doing more effective analysis. People are incredibly scared of being able to re-identify individuals through that data. And so it ends up being an entirely different conversation if it's being led from a senior IT position versus a programmatic angle. And I think the art for us has been learning to do both. We really like the idea of risky, ambitious projects. Like I said, we don't have all the answers right now. We have to try new things. But if we just ignore what some of the very real concerns are, we are gonna put some people in danger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think those concerns are certainly ones that clearly many of our members struggle with on a very regular basis, and I think we as a sector are still trying to get our heads around, right? Like, what's the right approach? I do want to pivot on that for just a second, because one of the questions that we've started to look at within the Center for the Digital Nonprofit is this question of data governance, data use, data policies, all those kinds of things. And Tableau has been a sponsor of the data for disaster preparedness work that we're doing, and that's looking at data escrow models, right, to prepare. And one of the challenges that we've run into, not just the capacity on the analytics side and from a data usage perspective, but really how do we as a sector build our capacity to think about the different models for data usage and scenarios for data usage, and then identify the risks and opportunities. Do you see that conversation happening across the sector, or is it still episodic?
I think it's episodic, and I think only a portion of the burden for that is placed on the NGO. I think the funding community has a very heavy hand in the way they fund projects, whether it's official development assistance, whether it's large institutional private foundations. Things are funded in a silo, and so as a result, the conversations about data in the organization are taking place in a silo. What we've tried to do is, as we have successes within one of those silos, trying to share them as loud as we can. And it's certainly not from a self-promotion perspective. It has much more to do with sort of expanding the imagination, expanding the understanding of folks who are doing comparable work. They may see something that they take out of the work we're doing with PATH on malaria eradication and say, oh, this is remarkable. I could absolutely use this in climate action, or I could use this in a hunger situation. And so being able to share those best practices, and that's what's so exciting about the center, is it's a repository for those kind of best practices. Yeah,
we have certainly spoken to the PATH and malaria work.
Yeah.
I also always talk about the Feeding America comparison slide that you guys did. I adore that slide. It's one of my favorite examples to use around the usage of data around benchmarking and comparison. Ron, I want to ask you guys, because this notion of privacy and protection is obviously a very real one in the child sponsorship world, and in a world where sponsors and children want to have a one-to-one relationship. How does technology affect the way that you guys think about that?
I think as we look at data, first, humans are kind of funny things, right? We look at data, and especially in missional companies, right? That's what we're talking about here. People are very passionate, and arguments are not always made with data. And if you bring in data, as you were saying, you bring in data, and if it agrees with people's gut, then they kind of take it on board. And if it doesn't, then they cast a sideways glance at it, and it takes time then to bring it in. As we look at privacy as a general concept, both on our sponsor side and on the beneficiary side, it makes a big difference to us, because we would like to take that data and publish some of it, and we can't do that with personal data in it. I think that as we look through data, everybody in this room is gathering specific forms of data in whatever business industry they're in, but we don't share very much. We tend to kind of just do what we do with it. And I think that there are a couple of stages that we should probably think about as we're going through the Center for Digital Development. I think first, if you have unique data, maybe publish a metric, a mark of some kind, right? Every week, every month, every year, whatever that is. And then secondarily, try to find out secondary uses and reach out to see if we can share that data rather than just keeping it to ourselves and trying to run our own NGO with it.
Yeah, it is. I think that opportunity that data sharing creates is is a tremendous one for the sector, and it's very scary for a lot of organizations. You guys have taken a very forward-looking view of where you want to take technology inside Compassion and how you want to use that for the work that you do. Where did that inspiration come from?
To be very frank, I think it came from an underinvestment in that thinking for about a decade. I think what happened was we elected not to change, at least at the Global Ministry Center, and kind of suppressed change on purpose for about a decade, and then figured out that if you sit on the powder keg of progress sooner or later, right? And then decided to change, and so. A 60, 65-year-old company trying to come into the digital age, and that's why we did so much at once. I don't recommend it. We installed an ERP and a CRM at the same time. I would encourage all of you not to do that. And so we came into what you would define as 2.0, kind of being dragged into the light, kicking and screaming, right? And we seek not to repeat that sort of change. We want to be much more incremental about the change. So when I came in a couple of years ago, we underwent a pretty significant human engineering project. It had very little to do with technology, and very little does, right? People are complex, and technology is fairly simple. So we looked at our business model in IT and saw a business model. Typically, you walk in and you see a business model that works on paper and it doesn't work in practice. Ours didn't work on paper, so we decided to do something fairly radical. We took what was a fairly traditional IT practice and set it on its side. And so IT is managed horizontally, and the work flows vertically, aligned by business domain, and that sentence sounded really simple. It wasn't. My leadership team and I spent probably 10 months, over 10 months, we spent probably 800 hours in a small room with the teams on the wall, people's names, people's strengths, people's personality styles, and psychologically engineered teams so that they could be successful if they chose to be. And then moved ahead into that new structure October of last year. When I return tomorrow morning, we plan our program increment 6 in that new model. But it was a lot more human engineering than it was technology.
I mean, that's really insightful, actually. To think about sort of how do you structure teams to be successful, not from the technology or the process perspective, but the humans that are involved in it.
Right.
And certainly, you've heard us talk about it this week, and frankly, I think we've learned a lot from what you guys have done, in thinking about the people skills that are necessary
right.
To pull all that together. Did your colleagues across Compassion embrace that? Did it take some work to get people on board with that idea?
The answer is yes. As you pour a bucket of water, some ground takes it up and some ground doesn't. I think, the entire organization now is talking in lean principle terms, right? Agile, if you will. It took some people longer. I think HR was the quickest. They were already moving through some change and radical improvement, and they took up that human engineering piece of what we were doing very quickly and supported it very well. And I think, it's now there, and it's entrenched thinking, and it's kind of a pattern of what we do. But folks did come along at different speeds over 18 months.
Steve, you guys work with a wide variety of organizations and quite often work in multi-stakeholder partnerships. What in the work that you've been involved in, have you seen the same experience that the people side and the skill sets are really critical to the success of a project?
I'd say it's somewhere between 85 and 90% of the art of getting it right. And we've seen sort of having a cross-sector portfolio, sort of geographically agnostic, industry agnostic. One of the best things we've been able to bring into a lot of partnerships is best practice from places that you wouldn't necessarily expect. So we have somebody working in education in Alabama, and he talks about how he works with school districts and educators themselves to start to think about student level data as something that they can use for lesson planning. It's not just, to this point under No Child Left Behind, it had all been, it's performance review, and like I said, it's often punitive. So there were some ideas he developed called a data walk. And even though they had this fancy Tableau deployment, he started by printing out all of the visualizations and taping them to the wall, and they would walk around the room together. And the physical act of walking together disarmed folks and opened it up for conversation. And there was a lot of excitement in seeing the nuance that was coming through in the visualizations. So we then are able to turn around and working with global development and global health organizations and say, I understand, whether it's training community health workers in Zambia or World Food Program in Yemen, much of that practice is actually still valuable, is still applicable, disarming people, making them feel ownership over the information that's coming through the dashboard, as opposed to feeling like that is a threat against what is their professional currency. They're in their role because they are an expert in something or they have a discipline in something. And it makes them feel like this is an asset and something that's on their side, as opposed to something that stands in opposition. And just sort of thinking about how humans interact with information in that way is an incredibly tricky task. And so
that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, can you imagine next year at the summit, we've got the data walk, and it's just something really fascinating, and the ability then to. I was just thinking about the difference of the experience of sitting in a room watching PowerPoint slides and having someone talk at you versus walking side by side with someone, even if you're just around a small conference room, right? And the difference in the way that information would be received and the opportunities to deliver that information as well. But that's a different, when we think about, human capacity building inside the sector to do these types of things and to use data well, that's a very different type of human capacity. It's a very different skill set than we normally think about in terms of data analytic skills and those types of things. You guys work with your Tableau MVPs, your Tableau heroes that have done so much to support the sector. What inspires them? And how do you guys as an organization, I'm obviously going to pivot here just a little bit to talk about a different side of human work. How do you guys get them involved and keep them organized at some level to bring to the work that we do here in the sector?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So if anybody in the room has been to a Tableau conference, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. It's Bonnaroo for nerds. It's really kind of remarkable when you see how excited people get about it. And I think a lot of that is you have career professionals who have struggled to succeed in their role, and suddenly they find the tool that feels like it's the breakthrough experience. We have what we call our Tableau Zen Masters. We have an ambassador program. We have Jedis. We have every nerdy tech industry name you can put on this. But it is the passion these folks feel for data and analytics does not exist outside of a certain worldliness. There's still a whole person there. And if you sort of reduce them down to their day job, they feel like they're not fully expressing their passion and interest. So our Zen Masters, we have 22 globally. They are the power users. They like to brag that they can break Tableau. They can go on the other side and rebuild it to do what they need to do. And probably the product team doesn't want me saying that, but when they've got that sort of passion and that sort of worldliness, they're incredibly enthusiastic about solving intractable problems. And this sector tends to be, this sector exists because of intractable problems. And so we've actually found that the request isn't even out of our mouths before they've said yes. And they together as a community have really rallied around a lot of these projects. And it's not just sort of limited to these power users either. We have built something called the Tableau Service Corps, which if anybody is a Tableau user here in the room and hasn't gone to the servicecorps.tableufoundation.org, it's a remarkable, I think we have about 150 employees and partners up there. And any nonprofit, anytime you need, you can have a Tableau expert there to help out with the project. They are so enthusiastic to contribute their skills to help solve a real problem. And it's been remarkable. It's one of the first things we hear back from our own employees is like, this was the greatest experience of the year for me, was being able to volunteer with this organization or that organization and feel like they really are doing something great. Yeah. And I'll put in one quick plug. We've got a table outside with the Service Corps website up. If you just want to go check it out, do. So. Well,
it's a great example. I mean, NetHope and Tableau have been working together for a couple of years now, and I am always impressed and thankful of the comprehensiveness of the way that you guys approach your partnerships with nonprofits. I mean, we are certainly I just can't say that word. There are lots of good things coming our way as a result of our work on the data for disaster preparedness. You know, thinking about some of the human issues, thinking about the employee base at Tableau and your partners, right, that can help us when we hit some of these gnarly problems, thinking about the policy issues and connecting us with the people that can help us crack through some of those issues. And it's been pretty remarkable, and is, I mean, frankly, a statement to you and Neil and the rest of the team at Tableau Foundation around the comprehensiveness of the way that you approach that partnership. So thank you. Yeah. Didn't mean to turn that completely into a commercial for the Tableau Foundation, but that was a commercial for the Tableau Foundation. Because I do think that, you know, I think one of the things that we are certainly beginning to realize, and certainly I think that we hope to embody in the center, is that these questions are not just questions of technology, right? It's not, you can't just buy the product and all of a sudden that would be great. If that were true, I own a really nice pair of running shoes and I would be completely capable of running a marathon. And the reality of it is, you know, I can't. There's so much more that goes into it. Ron, you guys have taken a very comprehensive view, you know, in terms of thinking about the work that you've both over the last couple of years, and all major credit for taking on ERP and CRM at the same time. That was pretty brave, but you guys have taken a very comprehensive view about the way that you approach some of these projects that you've got coming up in the future. Who have been your key partners internally? I mean, as you've reached out from a leadership perspective, you know, who have you thought about building connections with? Sure.
So I think, you know, it depends on which of the pieces of the platform you're looking at. Certainly, Salesforce and NetSuite have been great partners. We are working with Microsoft and one of their premier partners, Ryan Tech, to bring technology directly to the church. Tablets right in front of kids, data being entered, not re-entered, right? We're moving from a binder world to digital. And that will take it all the way out to the edges in every location. And so those are the partners that we're working with now. We are looking at a huge number of partnerships, as you might imagine, for moving ahead. Our data science platform is still open. We're not, we haven't announced anything there. But as we build out our new business platform and data science, more partners will come up. And who are your internally inside your organization not the compassion is siloed, but when we think about the different organizations inside the different departments inside a large organization, who do you turn to first to start building momentum for new efforts? I think that depends on what it is. I think for human efforts, certainly our HR department has been, again, they came along very quickly. We probably, if I look across my agile teams, I would guess about 45% of that is in the supporter domain, which many of you would call marketing, I think, in general terms. And then the rest are broken out across the bridge domain, the beneficiary domain, and other. But the primary piece of it would be against supporter and marketing. I remember talking to you guys maybe 6 or 9 months ago, and it was pretty clear that the number of churches that were reaching out to be part of the work that Compassion was doing was greatly outnumbering your ability to onboard new communities that wanted to do work. What's your goal in terms of, maybe goal is the wrong word, but how are you approaching sort of bridging that gap? Because it's wonderful to have more offerings than one can receive at one time. But how do you think about the plan to
to close that gap?
Yeah, more products is the answer. So we have one methodology whereby we engage with a church and pipeline new churches through to qualify them, right? Some churches are lower resourced than that, and some are actually over-resourced. So how do you make a church independent? How can they carry on a like program but not receive funding necessarily from Compassion because now they're large enough to do that? How then do you engage with a smaller church? You can enable them to do a great amount of good without reaching whatever arbitrary threshold you had set prior, right? So some of the thresholds are you have to have X number of classrooms and you have to have access to this kind of teacher and nurse for the 0 to 3 program. But then how do you engage both below that and above that? And so we're developing products for that. In addition, we're looking at locations that are a bit higher barrier to entry. So Myanmar would be one of those, and looking at products for doing that.
Thank you both. I mean, I think you guys have done a great job of sort of, giving us some real world examples about how we look, beyond the technology and to the more comprehensive way of approaching digital transformation inside organizations, and speaking to the work that both of you have done. From two different sides of the equation, but to achieve some things and that have a real impact in the world. So thank you. Please join me in thanking our panelists. I'm going to turn this over to Frederick.